So nice to be among my Southampton friends again. And I also especially want to thank my wife, Marlene Malicote, who died last year, who did so much to keep me floating. You get so much now for free, it seems like paradise. Bread and circuses. All this free stuff on the internet. Data transmission inconceivable to our grandparents, let alone to the computer pioneers. A worldwide ocean of whooshing data called the internet, which many people confuse with the World Wide Web, the visible boats that are bobbing on this invisible ocean. I'm going to tell the story decade by decade, because it's a little hard for you folks who are under 50 or 40 or 30
or 20, there's a baby at the back.
And it's a little hard for you to visualize. One's notion of the distant past usually begins about 20 years before you were born. The roaring 20s were 20 years before I was born. It seemed like a distant past at that time. So, Wendy likes me to give it a personal slant. I'm sorry to have to tell it entirely personal, but to quote Roald Dahl, truth is more important than modesty. I envisioned much of today, long before anybody else, and I don't generally get the credit. I won't enumerate most of the things I invented or thought of independently, but it's a long list. But it is incontrovertible that the World Wide Web was my idea back in 1960 and 61. They sandwiched me in between Engelbart van Nevar-Bush and Utley. I thought I was going to be the entrepreneur to create personal computing and worldwide hypertext and image synthesis, now called CGI. And then my plan was, when I'd made lots of money, which I thought would be by about 1970, I could pay to have all my notes put into digital form, and that won't happen. So here I'm stuck with at least 500,000 notes on different subjects that future scholars may paw through. I had my own designs. They are different from the designs which became popular. And that's why I have never gotten on any of the bandwagons. I didn't get on the Microsoft bandwagon, I didn't get on the Apple bandwagon, I didn't get on the World Wide Web bandwagon, because my designs were and remain different. Also, I never got leverage, and I had a number of personality flaws, which I may or may not get into. As I see it, the World Wide Web came about from 2 mistakes that I made, as distinct from being a miracle that someone else thought of. Tim Berners-Lee is a wonderful guy, but his contribution is mistaken. People think hypertext was his idea. There were 4 or 5 hypertext systems on the internet before HTML, some of which had embedded markup in angle brackets. Tim's real contribution, to my way of thinking, was the URL, which unified all the file systems on all the different disks that were rotating on the internet that couldn't talk to each other, until he created a universal language that reconciled all the different unices and Microsoft data structure and Apple data structure into one addressable whole. That was brilliant and would have resulted in hypertext with one-way hypertext even without HTML. Now, many young people, I was shocked when I taught a course recently, many young people don't realize that everything you see on the computer screen is a construct that was invented by somebody. People don't get that. They say, oh, it's a computer, it's got this, it's got windows, it's got menus in it. All those things were invented by different people. You take overlapping windows for granted, done at Xerox PARC. You take so-called cut and paste for granted. This outrages me because it was a twisting of previous words. Cut and paste when I was young meant you took a manuscript copy and cut it up in different sections and moved them around to the table until they were in the right order. And we still don't have that tool. Because when the Macintosh came out, Larry Tesler changed the meanings of the word cut and paste to meaning hide and plug, or cram and vomit, if you C and V. So that you can only hide one, you can only quote cut one thing, and if you forget, the phone rings, you've lost it. So 1 million valuable things are lost to the human race every day because of this abominable mechanism which is justified by this propagandistic use of two words whose very good meaning should still be implemented in tools we do not have because they didn't think we needed it. And by the way, Larry Tesler is a good friend of mine. He still doesn't understand why this was a crime against humanity. So all these things were invented, and in some cases fought over. For example, on today's screens, the only thing that I invented that you're used to is the back button. I invented that in 1967. Yes, it was invented. I had to fight for it. The guys at Brown University said, oh, users will never understand that. I said, trust me. I'm not a computer guy, or I was not a computer guy. Now I have an honorary PhD in computer science, so I suppose I'm a computer scientist. But I was a media guy. A media guy, very ambitious, very brash, very egotistical. I exploded out of college, extremely ambitious, with a lot of hubris. I expected to be a Hollywood director and a major intellectual. I usually knew about things first. I would find out about things first because of my wide-ranging interest and serendipitous skills. And I usually understood things first, or last. Either the first person to understand things or the last. Some things I could never understand. The limit in calculus took me 50 years to understand. But I was sure I would do what had never been done before. I didn't know what it was. It was going to come to me because things were constantly changing. So that was 1959. I had a serious media background. I mean, what was the background of all this? As a kid in World War II, I had studied comic books and radio and magazines and movies in every detail. I was washed over these things emotionally. I loved media. The word media had not been popularized at that time. Marshall McLuhan popularized it back in 60-something. But back in the 40s, it was just our world of thought. The radio, we all listened to the radio at night. And by the way, it was different listening to the radio with your family than watching TV with your family, because watching TV, you're not looking at each other. Listening to the radio, you're looking at each other. Completely different experience. I also learned a lot from my parents, whom I rarely saw. They were divorced shortly after I was born, but my mother took me backstage at Broadway several times, and my father took me in TV control rooms, so I was able to see a new medium being born. I knew new media would be born. I didn't know what the next new medium would be, but I knew there would be one, and I suspected I might be involved with it. In college, I went wild with media. I majored in extracurriculars, as they say. Since I didn't think my grades would have any bearing on my future life, I simply slid past in my courses with minimal effort and concentrated on writing humor, publishing magazines, appearing in plays. I won a prize for playwriting. I had a weekly column. I published my first book. I produced a long-playing record, and I believe I wrote and produced and directed the world's first rock musical in 1959. This is not acknowledged by any rock musical history sites. It was a musical, not a rock opera. A musical is a play in which people suddenly stop and sing, right? And it was very bad. But some of the songs are on that. But at the same time, I was trying to make history, and I think it did. Someday to be acknowledged. But most important of all, my last couple of months, I shot a half-hour film comedy with no preparation. I had my roommate and I got a $700 budget to make a movie. Now, what would $700 pay for in 1959? It would pay for 30 minutes of black and white with no sound and one work print, 16 millimeter. So you had to be very careful. 30 minutes, pardon me, 60 minutes. And I used 30 of them, which I think is pretty good. And you can see that comedy on YouTube. It's called The Epiphany of Slocum Furlow. I'm still very proud of it, but it's too slow moving for other people. And because we couldn't afford sound, that would cost $10,000. The idea was to do wild sound and have the people fit the soundtrack to the movie afterwards. That's called wild sound. But also, I hadn't written the script yet, so I said to the actors, well, just say part. It'll look funny. And it does look funny to some people, but most people think it looks terrible. And so this is a great barrier to the appreciation of the subtlety of the humor. Well, anyway, so I was sure I was a very talented filmmaker, and that it was my real talent, but I also consider myself a serious intellectual and generalist. And that's why I thought I would be a Hollywood director and a major intellectual, like my hero Jean Cocteau, who directed Beauty and the Beast and also did a great deal of writing in the French philosophical way. And so by all these means, I was completely primed for what would happen next. So in graduate school, I took a computer course. And my reaction was, holy smoke, they've been lying to us all these years. A computer is not an engineering device. It's not a scientific machine. It's an electric train. It's an all-purpose machine, which is what von Neumann called it. And von Neumann, by the way, stole the credit for what is now called the von Neumann machine from my friend John Walkley. But the point is that you could do anything with it. It was just a small matter of programming. And here was the biggie. You could put screens on them. I saw this in my IBM manual for the 7090. Here's a picture of a screen, okay? I got a brochure from Digital Equipment Corporation for the PDP-3 computer, only $125,000, 12 bits, 12 millisecond cycle time, something like that. But it had a screen. It showed a guy with a light pen. Little did I know, of course, they hadn't sold any by the time I got the brochure. And that there were very few people working on computer screens at this time. My guess is no more than 50 in the world, okay? At NORAD, in missile defense, air traffic control, and research at MIT and Stanford. That was it. And me. But I had a different point of view. Because I said, wait, screens, I can do that. I'm a movie maker. How do we want the screens to respond? And if the price is going to go down the way they said, and Moore's law had not yet been articulated, but its equivalent had been stated by my prof. The prices are going to go down and down and down as semiconductors become more and more integrated. Integrated state circuits were just about to take off. So I said, okay, the interactive computer screen, I could imagine it the way no one I've ever met could imagine, because I was a movie maker. So you do this, you do this, wow, if you do this, you do that, oh boy! So I would sit with my eyes closed, wiggling my fingers, saying, okay, do this, do that. For example, one of my first ideas for displaying the length of a document, you'd have the title and a diagonal line across it, which would show logarithmically the size of the document, rather than having a separate window for it. That kind of thing. And I couldn't explain it to anybody. My great-grandfather, who was a science teacher, couldn't understand what I was saying about interactive screens. What? And he was a science teacher, very, very intelligent man. So no one could understand these things. And I was buffaloed trying to explain these ideas to people for a decade. But I knew the interactive screen was going to be the new home of the human race, and I do believe I was the first person to know it. So the rest was just, as they say, jazz mob, just a small matter of programming. And of course, price had to come down. The IBM 7090 was as big as, well, maybe this stage area, and had to have an air-conditioned room, and was roughly the equivalent of a Commodore 64 or maybe an 8008, or maybe 286. But in any case, there was no question the price was coming down, so the point was to plan. And I was not the only person who was planning for personal computers. I was the only person I think who was planning for screens in the same way. And so I also said, to me, the screen was a different kind of projector. Any filmmaker learns what's possible with the equipment. So to me, learning about computing was just learning about another kind of camera projector. I was not a programmer. I once took a test at Data Point. They said I was a producer-director personality. I didn't know there was such a thing, but apparently so. And I'm not a programmer, but so I've had to work through programmers, which is a nightmare, because every programmer is a rogue magician who may or may not tell you his real agenda. I talked to one of the people on the original Macintosh team, and you see, the programmers never want to obey the specs. I talked to a guy on the original, I can't remember his name now, but he told me that they had hidden one wire from Steve Jobs. They said, no, we've got to have this expansible. Jobs doesn't want us to have it, Steve doesn't want us to have it, but we're going to hide that wire. And if they hadn't created that hidden wire, the Mac could not have been expanded from the 128 or 256K version. So sometimes they're right. Usually they're wrong. Because everyone has a different direction they want to take a concept in. But this is in the nature of human ideas. Every human idea creates variations and schismatics and people who want to do it a different way. And that's why we have so many churches, and that's why we have so many political parties, right? And that's why we have so many different ideas of what's right to eat, superstitions. And so, no less the case in computer doing. My plan had too many threads. Not my first idea, which is too embarrassing to tell you, but my evolving idea in 1960 and 61, when I was still a graduate student taking this first course, was to have a company that would be called General Creative, you know, like General Electric. But it would have a sort of a folksy, artsy atmosphere. In other words, it would be like what came to be Apple. And I would be its figurehead and director of software and everything. And in other words, I invented Steve Jobs when he was only 5 years old. But he got to be Steve Jobs in 1980. The hypertext concept for me was two things. Not just the jump link. See, okay, what people call the hyperlink to me is a diving board into the unknown. You're jumping to you know not what. And to me that's very irritating because I would like to be able to show you visible connections between pages. This is what I call the Xanadu link now. I want you to be able to see this on the screen. People say, well, what do you really mean? What I really mean is that you see this on the screen. Here's one page and something's highlighted. Here's another page and something's highlighted. And there is a strap or beam or bridge visibly connecting them. I want to say that I'm shouting that at you because people don't get it. They say, how could that be? That's not how computers work. What is, it's how we make them work. No, it doesn't fit in anybody else's paradigm or universe or operating system. So it's very much a hill to fight. So Nelson Hypertext is, which we now call Xanadu, has jump links and Xanadu links. So when I say the World Wide Web is my idea, he took out the Xanadu links. But the rest was what I was talking about all these years. Indeed, let's see. This is a paper during the Great Fallow period. Many take the position that hypertext or non-sequential, this was before the web. Many take the position that hypertext or non-sequential writing for computer screens comes out of computer science or technical developments of some sort. I insist rather that writing sequentially, like traveling on the ground, or speaking only to those who can hear unaided voices, has been forced on us by a set of original circumstances that we may now transcend. Writing non-sequentially will better disclose the true structure of ideas, permit the reader freer understanding material, and permit new expository, stylistic, and rhetorical inventions. Many fine writers of the past, from Lawrence Stern to Nabokov, have striven toward hypertext, now it is an available genre. Today's authors may now easily publish in hypertext forms, at least for the Macintosh. I was referring to guide rather than hypercard. But there's no generalized format that will run on all computers and all screens, archive well, or cross networks. The key problem is therefore to create a universal literary medium, an unbounded storage and delivery system as simple in concept as the book and library, unrestricted as to what screens you may see it on or speech synthesizers you may hear it from in case you are blind, unrestricted in its organization, unimpeachable in its authenticity, and as quickly available as a phone call. Naturally, they must have room for all previous sequential and graphical forms as well. Anyone may publish marginalia and commented links. This generates a new and exceptionally open realm for controversy, teaching, scholarship, and creativities as yet unseen. Little did I know that for such writings I would be considered the John the Baptist to Tim Berners-Lee. So what happened was the web ate our lunch. So my plan had too many threads. There was the general creative company, hypertext, not just jump links, but visible connections. Movie editing. In 1965, I applied for a patent for movie editing by computer. But as usual, in most of my patent efforts, I didn't have the money to pursue it once I got the receipt for the original filing. And so that died. But since that was in 65, maybe I might have gotten it in 1970, so it would have probably been dead by, well, it probably might have well been dead by 1988 when the first Avid computer editor, movie editor came out. So it was so hard to know which of these threads to pursue. In 1961, it occurred to me that I suddenly, in a flash of insight as I was crossing Cambridge Common in the USA, I imagined ray tracing, that you could have ways of probing a three-dimensional scene and recording the color you got to, and later the shadows, and so you could do realistic photography by computer. And I believe mine was the first publication on this subject, which you can see in my book, The Scene Machine. But of course was Pixar and ILM that later did the job. I would, like many people, I had no idea of how big the projects were that I had in mind, let alone the difficulty in an ever-shifting panorama of available equipment, services, and products of gradually lowering cost. What system to go for? What boat to sail on? The IBM thing, IBM had this terrible mainframe business. Digital equipment had these little machines, but there's no way I could afford them, and I tried to get one into a publishing company on Madison Avenue and got booted out for my troubles. So it was very hard to see where I would hang on, and because I was not the type to get a PhD in computer science, I didn't have that avenue, so it was impossible to get leverage. Now, most important was my windowing concept and the document concept of transpointing windows. So here we are. I missed this one. Talking about what I did in college. This is the best example of the stuff I was doing in college. I said I had a little magazine. Well, here it is. It was a very little magazine. And that was issue number 3, which I did by myself, which had 2 colors and it was kite-shaped, and you had to rotate it as you turned the pages. It was very original and a lot of fun. And I just realized, I should have kept up with Nothing Magazine. I owned the copyright. I could have done that. But I didn't. Just another thread. But when I met Victor Navansky, the editor and publisher at that time of The Nation magazine, which is the oldest liberal magazine in the United States, dating back to before the Civil War, I think. I met him maybe 20 years ago, and he said, "Not Ted Nelson, not the Ted Nelson." Maybe. And he said, "Not the Ted Nelson who published Nothing magazine." So talking, the central idea of mine that nobody else has cognitive is the notion of parallel interconnected pages. So this is the first, this is the first publication I did. Actually, this is a crummy picture because I can't find my file copy of the original. It was published as part of Brunel University Online 72 conference, which I did not manage to attend, not having money to cross the Atlantic, but there it was. So, and Wendy actually found it for me. So here is an office worker allegedly sitting at a computer screen. Now, in 1972, no office workers had a computer screen. This was actually this electric typewriter that I disguised with plastic. But here's a close-up showing connections, visible connections between pages. Visible connections between pages! Let's make sure. and even now, I don't know any systems that have this. So, and on the web, well, we'll get into that. Here is a prototype we did in 1992. I'm getting ahead of myself. This is an actual functioning prototype of Xanadu Green. We put in the public domain, open source in 1992, and I have it interactive if any of you need to see it. And on the left is the first draft of the Declaration of Independence by Thomas Jefferson, an important document to us, and I guess in this country too. And in the right is the second and final draft. The corresponding identical parts are seen in color. The gray are only in the specific draft you see them in. And so the ringing sentence, "We hold these truths to be self-evident," which is in the right, was originally, "We hold these truths to be sacred and undeniable." Well, Jefferson didn't want to say sacred, and so that's what we got. Self-evident was a little strong. So anyway, here, this is the way you should be able to look at versioning. I note, by the way, that this simple model of versioning, when you look at techie systems for versioning, they're so clumsy and complicated. Whereas this will show you the differences between two texts very cleanly. Okay, so here's a version that was done with Ian Heath here at Southampton. We called it Cosmic Book. We did that in 2003. That's also available. Pardon me, I have it as a demo. Distributing these things becomes a whole problem of support and liability, so I'm not distributing them. And here's the beaut with Robert Adamson Smith, Xanadu space. I can, if we have time, I will show it to you interactively, but I don't think we'll have time. So the point is that you have visible connections between pages which you can follow. So right here are the two pages which are currently connected, but any of these others can be pulled up side by side so you can see their particular visible connections. So, for all I was trying to do, I never got leverage. Jobs had Wozniak. So he was able to put out the Apple I, which Wozniak, by the way, just said was inspired by my book, Computer Lib. Bill Gates had, what's his name? Anyway, trustworthy partners. I was operating alone. Eventually, I found serious collaborators, but much further down the pike. So I started at the top and went down from there. It's amazing I got as far as I did. Envision the 1960s. You're thinking Vietnam, Nixon, and Woodstock. By the way, I'm an early adopter. I bought my tickets for Woodstock, I believe, 2 months early. When they didn't arrive in the mail, I went to the office and got a second pair, which is probably on file somewhere. What were computers then? They were huge machines in air-conditioned rooms, costing usually hundreds of thousands of dollars. A few of them, by digital equipment, came down below 100,000 around 1968. I took a course at Harvard in 1960 and was indignant at how they'd been presented to the public. They weren't scientific, they were electric trains, you could do anything with them. In So, and I said, screens, I can do that. And I started designing the text system I wanted. And note that most of your other pioneers were designing for other people, trying to imagine what imaginary people in the public would want. I was designing for what I wanted, which is entirely different, because you know your market. Doug Engelbart, by the way, the great Doug Engelbart, who thought of a number of these things ahead of me, was also designing for himself. So my vision of worldwide hypertext, there was no internet, so I didn't plan on the internet, but IBM said there would be connectivity, and that was good enough for me. And I hated the limitations of paper, and at last we could get out of it. What did the other guys do later? They imitated paper. What is a text document? It is a representation of thought. What is the topology of thought? Connective structure. It goes in all directions. My slogan is, there's too much to say, and it goes in all directions. So that gives us, as the simplest way of letting things go in all directions, the jump link. But what else do we need? We need to see the connections, and that is why the connective structure I've shown you is important. So my idea of hypertext was jump links plus visible connections between pages. In 1965, I gave my first main big talk to the ACM. Most of the computer scientists in the world were in that room, I believe, because there weren't that many computer scientists in the world. I think I counted the seats at 300. We got huge applause, and I did it, with a lot of showmanship and slides. But after that, I was stuck because I had nothing to show. I had no computer access. I wasn't a programmer, but I went around making speeches about how great it was going to be. And I did this for years. And I just read you one of those papers. My first big mistake was a project at Brown University. I burnt up all my savings and was constantly insulted. It was there I stressed the jump link because in that atmosphere it was the most I could communicate with all the insults and so forth. But we did implement a transclusion operation which was not documented. The resulting software, the Brown University Hypertext editing system, with one-way jump links became the standard idea of hypertext, which Tim Berners-Lee later implemented. So that was the first mistake I made, which was dumbing down the idea. Now for the 1970s, the land rush, because a lot of people could see that chip computers were coming out, they were getting cheaper and cheaper and cheaper. And the Altair computer published, the Altair computer was announced in the January 1974 issue of Popular Electronics, on the cover. At last, a computer you can build yourself for only $400. With no memory. I'm talking no RAM. Disk memories were not available at the time. Later, someone came out with the CUTS computer, the cassette interface, where you could record modem sounds on an audio cassette. So things came out very slowly. So 1974, I published Computer Lib, which I had been working on an introduction to computers, and I couldn't figure out the slant till the title suddenly came to me, Computer Lib, which put it parallel to Women's Lib as a liberation movement, and so I could posture as a liberator. Whereas in fact, I was trying to make enough money to back my own software. The book was a huge success in some ways. It sold 50,000 copies, influenced many people, caused Wozniak to build the Apple II, influenced Bill Gates, as he said in his Stanford address last June. But I didn't make any money because I was cheated by my distributors. So it did not achieve what I wanted. I wanted to instruct the public. I wanted to influence people. Mainly I wanted to do it myself, which I never did. I tried to get leverage, just as I was finishing Computer Lib, the Altair computer was announced. So I tried to get leverage by starting a computer store, and I took on some partners who were, shall we say, not the sharpest knives in the drawer. And we had some difficulties. But we all went to the World Altair Computer Conference in Santa Fe, I think it was, Albuquerque, in 1976. That's where I met Bill Gates. And everybody knew it was the new world, but nobody knew exactly what that new world would look like. Except I think I knew a little better, because other people were talking about kits for the hobbyist. And I'm saying computers for the home, computers for business, and computers on the desktop. And it came along. So, meanwhile, Apple, so you had the Altair movement with one standard, and the Apple I coming out, which nobody knew at the time that those would be the two biggies, because there were lots of others like the Tandy and so on. By the end of the 70s, it was already Apple versus Microsoft, but there were other things going on, and it wasn't clear that Apple and Microsoft would be the main players. Also, there was Xerox PARC, which was this well-funded operation of very conventional thinkers who, when they talked about the computer screen, they wanted to imitate paper. But otherwise, they did very good stuff. And they invented the current view that we call the modern GUI, or graphical user interface. I prefer to call it the PUI, or PARC user interface, because it was developed at Xerox PARC, and then imitated very badly at first Apple, and then at Microsoft, which was imitating Apple. So the point is, what they left out, I'm told by Alan Kay, who was there, that with the original PARC windows, you could have lines connecting windows. But the way they were imitated by Apple and by Microsoft, that possibility went away. I couldn't get on those bandwagons. They were conventional, and I had my own designs. Jobs pretended to be unconventional all those years, but he was simply combining and marketing other people's ideas with great taste and judgment, and the power to enforce them. His viciousness was helped him in that, and because he was a savage psychopath, he was able to accomplish much more than nice guys. The way I like to put it is, Steve Jobs truly knew the mind and heart of the user. Bill Gates at least knew what a user was. And the Linux people don't have a clue. So the internet was starting at that time, but I didn't pay attention. I wasn't in academia, I had no access. I figured there would eventually be a worldwide digital communication for the people, but I kept on with these designs. At the end of the 1970s, I put together my dream team. We spent the summer of 1979 designing worldwide hypertext, as I said, this entirely different addressing. Oh, I'm sorry, I said that in a different class. We designed an addressing structure based on tumblers. If you look up tumblers on Wikipedia, you'll get some of it, which would allow you to address spans of content, spans of versions, spans of documents in a uniform form and extremely mathematically brilliant form, which was replaced by the URL. So that finally stabilized the model of Xanadu text. In Xanadu, you store clean content without markup. I said that again. Clean content without markup. And then store each link independently. Each link is independent, a separate file. That means they can be reused in other documents. And apply them to the content. So you send out a list of content and a list of links, and these are combined in the browser, or whatever you call the Xanadu thing. Is this strange? Well, hell, what is done by the HTML monster right now is essentially the same, bringing on all kinds of salad from various places and combining them. Some people thought we insisted there should be payment for everything. No. We wanted to make it possible for anybody to publish things free, but we wanted it to be possible for artists and authors to be paid in small, reasonable amounts, seamlessly and cleanly, per character or other element. And we are now implementing this finally in Cambridge here. Richard Stallman was so outraged by the secrecy of the Xanadu project that he tells me that he created open source. But he didn't understand that it was supposed to be secret from IBM, who we thought would steal it. Ha! Who knew? IBM was the last to imagine personal computing. So now we move to the 1980s. Think the end of the Cold War. Ronald Reagan as president for most of the 1980s. Economic boom. Silicon Valley is now a concept, and venture capitalist. And in 1987, my colleague Roger Gregory made a deal with the Xanadu project to be supported by Autodesk to the tune of millions of dollars. But I was no longer in charge. Roger was in charge technically, but business guys were brought in who didn't buy into our big vision, and that is where I made my second big mistake. The programmers came to me and said Roger was being unreasonable and impossible and shouting, and they were all going to quit. And I didn't ask Roger his side. I went to the head of Autodesk and said, we've got to take Roger out of the way. I threw away the world that day because we would have had worldwide hypertext in 1989. the fall of 1988, a whole year and a half before Tim Berners-Lee. Whether it would have become a standard like the web, who knows? Is it too complicated? Well, some people say it's very complicated, but compared to JavaScript, my God. I made a lot of speeches. The summary I read you earlier, I actually made at Oxford in 1988, a year before Tim's proposal. So he says, no one has yet seen Nelson's idea of a docuverse, but they should all, it means a common addressing scheme for all nodes. And was he right? Yeah. He had one. Our addressing scheme was Tumblr's, and their addressing scheme was the URL, which is a very good thing to do. Okay. 4 years of money lost. The team at Xanadu, the Xanadu team at Autodesk under someone else, redesigned and redesigned for 4 years. The World Wide Web came out, and Autodesk killed the project after something like $5 million down the tubes. They worked very hard. Their intentions were great, and I will not badmouth any former colleague of mine, but it was a very wrong decision to try to redesign. So in 1989, Tim proposed the web and rolled it out gradually. By 1991, it was really taking off. The Xanadu group was appalled by the web and what it left out. But there you are. Eventually, I got the trademark back, so here we are. In 1989, here we are in a computer world I think of as a nightmare honky-tonk prison. Owned by great monopolies who are trying to kill network neutrality. Freedom of speech, yes. Freedom of speech. And people put in jail and tortured for it. Swamp, quicksand software like Microsoft Word and Photoshop. You have to devote your life to understanding them. Now, Microsoft Word began with high ideals, simple, clean, and now has become a quicksand swamp because that suits the monopolies. To make the software so complicated, you've got to spend months to find your way around. Swamped by advertising and all kinds of nasty intrusions by the dark side. Threats using many exploits from mislabeled links to man in the middle, to viruses, to worms, and so on. Many millions of people happily exchanging cat pictures while terrorists make plans. The Arab Spring was a disaster. We are still trying to survive the regime changes that have led to ISIS. Now, given that I was dealt one of the best hands in history, what should I have done? Certainly my failures are partly based on my own grouchiness, my own impatience with other people, my constant note-taking, which ate a lot of time, all the stuff I've kept, which many storage killed my savings. But I'm still trying to give the world decent electronic documents. Decent electronic documents with pages visibly connected side by side. As I think I said already, I'm not sure in this lecture, the topology of thought goes in all directions. The topology of documents so far, as implemented, is sequential because they basically, everything imitates Microsoft Word. Well, what about stuff on the side? Well, we're going to talk about that. There have been many, many publications, stuff on the side. The Talmud is stuff on the side. Nabokov's Pale Fire is on the side. I can never remember examples when I'm standing in front of an audience. But so many documents, you need to look at things in parallel and see their connections, and nobody's got it. So I see the parallel connected pages as the most visualizable and extensible generalization of the documents we have known in the past, and the great lack in the computer world today. Thank you.